Y'all, we are talking about the importance of buyer's agency, and I'm really happy to have Dillar Schwartz with the Dillar Group at Keller Williams Realty. Have to get that in there too, Dillar. Joining me. How are you, Dillar?
Great. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. We are talking buyer's agency, and you list a lot of properties, right?
I sure do.
And you've got a bunch of agents on your team.
I do. You are correct.
And we've got a situation where things are changing in the world of buyer's agency, and we've seen lawsuits and everything come into our world and looking at changing things up. But buyer's agency is an important role that every listing agent has to consider. And even in social media, we see things just even explaining commission. People aren't great at it. So I thought it would be great to have you join me today and talk about the importance of buyer's agency. Why do we need buyer's agents out there? Why can't we just be the listing agent and do everything?
My first thought on this, especially when I'm sitting in front of a client, is it's extreme. First of all, you can't represent two parties at the same time equally. And that could
Exactly,
be
especially not in Texas.
real estate or anything. Let's take real estate out of it. Let's go into any other industry, right? Let's go
Right,
into a retail store. When you go in and you try to buy whatever, a computer, the Apple representative needs to represent and sell the Apple product because they work for Apple, right? And that we're taking this to just a retail level. They represent their employer. They're hired
right,
to sell that product and to be knowledgeable. What gets me in the door is something different. And that's the same thing when we go all the way over to real estate. When we start specializing and really truly taking a deep dive into to being the best listing agent that we can, part of our compensation helps cover marketing. Who are we marketing it to? We're marketing it to buyers who need someone in their corner, which is 99% of the time they've got the trusted real estate advisor.
right,
Especially when you start getting into higher price points, people with money often have the real estate consultant, the attorney, someone, their CPA in their pocket who is even saying, go to a realtor. We've got this person who knows the market, who knows the area, who knows the neighborhood, understands pricing and value. So, as a listing agent, I believe in cooperative compensation because of representation and fairly representing each side, and then also knowledge.
right. And talking about those marketing dollars, we spend marketing dollars marketing properties to consumers as well as other agents. And a lot of deals are done because listing agents are working so hard to make other agents who may have a extra little handle or more buyers in the pipeline if we're focusing on listings to jump in and bring us a buyer for that property. We have to jump in and think about if we are standing on the side to which we represent. So if we're standing there representing the seller, then it's hard to ride two horses with one ass. We can't do a good job, or in Texas, we don't have dual agency, so we have intermediary. So we've got a situation where even if it turns into an intermediary transaction, we're not representing either side. So
Right.
even staying in as a buyer's agent or representing a buyer or us as a listing agent, each side has a viable and vital role in that success of that real estate transaction.
Correct.
And when we start thinking about working and not having so many buyer's agents out there, if that possibility ever happens, it's too early to say anything on what's going to be some of the changes. It would look like we would have a whole lot more unrepresented buyers out there working with listing agents if there was no buyer's agent in the mix. And
Correct.
if there was a buyer's agent in the mix, they're gonna have to be a little bit better on communicating their value, finding a way to get compensated, and coming up with alternatives to marketing for those
I
clients.
think that a general consumer, which we as an industry need to do a little bit better job of explaining, not just I go and do what you see on HGTV or open and close doors. If we really break it down, 90% of the agents start this industry as a showing partner and then they're assisting the buyer's agent, and then they are a buyer's agent, and then they become a listing agent. And there's really 2 sides of this contract that I think the average consumer does not realize. When you're sitting there, you should say, "Look, I have my buyer's agent hat on. This is the way we interpret the contract as a buyer. Here are my outs. Here's what I'm here to protect you first and foremost of whatever we're up to now, like 40, what are we at? 42 outs for a buyer, in addition to all of the contingencies, in addition to, okay, now let's bring in your lender." Right? All
Right.
of this happens that I think we forget to sit down, and we could do much better as an industry saying, "This is where I offer you protection as your buyer's agent. This is where I come in and make sure all of your T's are crossed, I's are dotted. And then, oh, by the way, here's what happens as a listing agent." When I feel like there is a point where you really do have to have 2 different levels of experience to look at the contract and to properly represent a buyer and a seller.
I
It is
agree.
2 different rodeos. I somehow started out, I think, reverse because I started out as more of a listing manager role, and I jumped over to the listing side first. And I remember representing my first buyer, and it was a whole different ballgame because in the system that I was trained on, you did one or the other. You did not do both.
Do you
Um,
find that you've carried that forth into the Dillar Group?
I would say I've carried, so I don't follow the traditional model of you have the listing specialist and then the agents can only work buyers.
Right.
However, when we do training, we do not just train. We do, this is listing focus. This is the listing presentation. These are the listing contingencies. This is the contract through the eyes of a listing agent. And then also in marketing, these are how listing marketing dollars are spent. And then, anything else. This is how we look at money on the listing side. And then we go over and we have separate training if we're talking about a buyer. This is what we need to worry about when we're talking about buyers, marketing, dollars, activities. And then you have a whole other component to this. If they're not a cash buyer, is we need to make sure that the lender is on the same page as you are and understanding the way it looks like for a buyer in terms of the lending side. I
Okay.
think buyer's representation can sometimes be a lot harder, especially in the market we're in today, because you actually have to understand the type of loan that you're about to dive into. Can you get this buyer to the closing table? Because now you have loan, the house, the contract, the lender, the appraiser, and you're trying to get this through to closing. Where on the listing side, you just have to make sure you're throwing out the best marketing, the best presentation you can to get that buyer. And
To
that's
fall
really
in love
hard
with
right
that
now.
property. Yeah, and when you are representing a seller, it's hard to manage the expectations of the buyer, and that buyer's agent plays that vital role.
Yeah, this all goes down to integrity and I think character. If you honestly think you can represent 2 parties on most of our clients, this is their largest investment, along with adding the legal, the ethics, the contract, and the knowledge, you're superhuman.
Right.
It just And why would you? Sometimes I can't sleep at night having 1 client, much less having 2 clients on the same transaction, and then you fall into, like, imputed notice or and these things where you're like, "Yeah, I think that something's wrong in the house." My client's saying that's not, but then now your other client wants to know the truth.
And you wanna do that on 18 hours of education every 2 years.
Yeah, I'm not signing up for that. Um,
Right.
I wholeheartedly believe in cooperative compensation, and I think when we sit down in an appointment with a client, if everyone would spend as much time learning and valuing cooperative compensation the same that they do Pantone's color of the year and all that other crazy stuff, if they spent them the same amount of time understanding what this truly means, then we could actually sit down across the table from a client and say, look, this isn't my commission. This is my compensation, and this is what it looks like to hire me.
Right. Do
This is
you
the whole picture.
do you think that many buyer's agents are even really good at the buyer agent presentation? You and I have talked about the buyer agent presentation and communicating your value for years.
I don't I don't wanna say I think they're good or bad at the presentation. I wanna say I think we could all do a better job at our order of operations, and part of this just comes by the nature of the industry of I'm driving by and I see a sign and I call and you have an eager beaver who's ready to jump in a car and run and show. And therefore, you're just not even in a good place to start the presentation. You're
Right.
standing in the front yard. It's either 110 degrees here in Austin and you just want to get inside and you don't even know this person's name. I feel like the entire process just starts out wrong. And if we could front load the buyer agency agreement, we might have I mean, this would just, we'd have a different way to do business. So I don't want to say that I think agents necessarily have a bad presentation. I think it's the process. And, I honestly think before even sellers just start letting people run in and out of their house based on someone calling a sign and you have two strangers going into a house, if we just started this process a little bit differently with who are you? What are you? What are we doing here? This is me. This is what I need you to sign this agreement or just the process. If we could change it a little bit and most importantly, front load that buyer agency agreement and understand.
So, what if you're a agent or on a team that specifically wants you to have that buyer agency consultation on the front end before you ever go look at a property? Yes, we understand you're interested in that. Let's meet before and talk and make sure you're approved. Do you think they all can even perfectly explain as a buyer's agent where the commission dollars come from?
No, I don't, because we've never had to do it. I shouldn't say we've never. I think there's more, the majority of agents haven't had to do it this way. Could we as an industry do better and practice and learn? If we start all doing it together a different way, I think in the next year or 2 years, it would be. And, there's been brokerages that have come up that do the discount buyer agent role or maybe even no fees on the buyer agent role, and they're not around anymore. And
Right.
they're not around for a reason because the model failed. I don't have the answer, but I do think we could, as a whole, do better explaining that and maybe even just doing a better of the whatever. So you do run out and you do show that one home and it's a hot shot showing, but set that expectation of, okay, this was one and done. But the next thing we need to do is we meet at the nearest local coffee shop, come to my office. I'm not going to fire off an offer tonight at 8 o'clock with my buyer rep agreement attached through DocuSign and never explain it to you. And I'm
Right.
guilty of that. I'm guilty of giving the 3-minute explanation of 20 minutes worth of legal docs.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the market also drove that of where we had to just, oh my God, sign, be done. And then we never stopped. We could slow down and give each other some grace, both on the listing side and the buyer side of, yeah, I did show your property, but now I need to sit down and I need to explain this to my client. So that, who's about to write the contract for your listing, give me a second, give me some grace. Let me go over, let me make sure all parties understand what they're doing. Yeah, and I think we should all just erase it out of our mind, the whole I'm free, I'm gonna open your door, I'm gonna be Vanna White, whatever that is. That's not how it works.
A few moments later.
Dillar and I have had Kathy Laswick, who's the managing broker at Realty One Group in Scottsdale, Arizona. Although I call her the high priestess over there.
Right.
She gets a little annoyed with me.
That's very sweet of you.
Hey, Diller and I are talking about buyer's agency and the importance of those roles. And we have been talking about the fact that it's hard. In Texas, we do things a little bit different than the rest of the world where we can't actually represent both sides in a transaction. And that's why I wanted to make sure that you were on this because y'all do things a little bit different in Arizona, like probably the most rest of the world. But we've been talking about really jumping in and being a buyer's agent and what you do to facilitate the transaction and how things are switching up and switching around with the lawsuit and the ones filed at this point in time. And one of the things that y'all don't know about each other is y'all both have this major common bond for teaching and motivating people. So that's why I love both of you. But Diller's been making some great points about how a listing agent really needs a buyer's agent to manage the buyer. And we were just talking about that whole buyer's representation meeting and how we oftentimes get a call and drop, rock, and roll to show that property. And we don't often get the time to present a buyer's rep agreement and everything from the very beginning. And I know Kathy's very passionate about buyer's rep agreements and running the show, just like Diller is in a very compliant method.
Uh, It is really hard in today's day and age to establish when you get that phone call and you have to run to that property. It is really hard to say, hey, let's talk about agency, which really in Arizona is the law. It is before you have any meaningful discussion. While it's showing a whole meaningful discussion, probably not. But at some point, when you start talking about comps and you start talking about value and what you do as an agent, then you're having a meaningful discussion. So in Arizona, an agency declaration is required literally at that time. But a lot of agents don't do that until later. So
Right.
the buyer broker agreement is simply something we all should have been using all along, quite honestly. And it's an opportunity for an agent to say, hey, this is my value to you as a buyer's representative. Here's my value to you as your representative, as your advocate, as somebody who's going to help you through the entire process. And I think probably what we do the worst job at is really saying, hey, this is my value. This is what I do. And this is why you should hire me. Because in essence, that's what a buyer broker is, an employment agreement. Interestingly enough, as listing agents, we have no problem going out there and saying, hey, here's what we do as a listing agent. Here's my marketing plan. Here's this. And so everybody signs a listing agreement, right? I'm going to pay you. Everything's fine. Probably what we haven't been doing is explaining the value of the buyer representation and
And
how
they bring
God,
somebody to the market just like a listing agent, right?
correct.
There's
Yeah.
really no difference in that.
Yeah. It's big. It's grab your value and put it out there. But Diller's correct when she is saying, hey, we have to stop using the phrase, I work for free. There's no value in that. There's no value in free.
We just need to throw free out. I've seen even post uncompensated activities even. And I had an attorney in last week who said, stay away from that too. Just get into the services that you provide and quit talking about what you get paid for and what you don't get paid for. Tell them what they're responsible to pay. We want to make sure that agents even understand the offer of compensation and how a buyer's agent gets paid, because a typical seller will see, and I've seen it in social media a lot in the last couple of weeks, where the seller sees the line item for the buyer's agency on a closing disclosure or a HUD-1 if there's a cash purchase, and everybody thinks that the seller is paying for the listing brokerage and the buyer's agency, when I think pretty much nationwide, we're negotiating as a listing agent, and then we cooperate and we offer a compensation in the MLS or through other agreements with a buyer's agency to bring a buyer.
Based on a choice that the seller made. The
Correct.
seller sets the compensation, or at least the agent recommends what would be a good compensation for a buyer broker to participate in that sale. So that is
And I think that listing agents need to include, in which we do, what the buyer's agents are actually doing. So in our case, they're doing their cold calls, they're prospecting, they're door knocking. And now with the younger generation of realtors and social media, there's no way that I could ever have the outreach I have without buyer's agents. And I would never be as good as I am today due to the volume that the team and the agents allow me to leverage. Because if it were just up to me, I'd maybe have 2 deals a month just based on leverage, and I want to serve at the highest level.
uh
But if I have to do my own open houses, show every single buyer, do all of the prospecting, every single piece of marketing, you just can't have. I mean, we have 20 something listings right now. We wouldn't be able to host the volume that we host without other agents cooperating with us. And I think being able to sit down in a listing appointment and explain, like, stop selling yourself, sell the process. Because if you think about it in reverse, it would be very interesting if we didn't have listing agents and a buyer's agent said, hey, I have a buyer now. I got to go cold call for listings and try to find a house for my client to buy.
Oh, what a nightmare.
Yeah, we don't turn the tables that way.
We have to do that already too much when we have a buyer that's looking for something that there is no property out there for.
Yeah, the buyer's agents have a grind of a job, and we have made it sound really fun by things like HGTV or, oh, Instagram. I'm just going and showing this amazing kitchen. And it's, oh, show the hustle, show the grind behind it.
Yeah,
And
because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of fun.
yeah, and exemplary as far as the listing and describing why you need a buyer's agent and why they're good for the process. And like you said, you're doing a lot of the buyer broker's job already by giving the value to the seller. But the seller has to understand that process. And it's not the lawsuit per se, the whole thing. I know they're going to appeal it. I know it's not settled. There are things that are going on. But I think that at a certain point, we all have to practice like Dillar does. We all have to give the statement of this is what the buyer broker does. This is why we offer compensation to them. This is why they're good for the process. And especially when it comes to vets, let's talk about the underserved.
Yeah,
Can't pay their own buyer reps.
yeah, and a
They
lot of
need to get
people
the VA loan.
I seem to teach that in contracts classes all the time, and somebody is missed telling everybody that if there is a VA loan, meaning the Veterans Administration is underwriting a loan for a veteran, that veteran is not allowed and cannot pay for buyer's agent representation. And it
Mhm.
has to be paid for by another party, which has traditionally been the seller. And I think that it's going to have to continue in that situation. And that's a protection that the VA does. Now, if you have a veteran that's doing a conventional loan, that's not,
Correct.
but when it is a VA loan, yeah, you can't do that. So, would you think that this seller would benefit by not having a buyer's agent? Because in the Sitzer case, he when he was interviewed, he said, You want me to pay for someone who's going to negotiate against me? I can think of 1,000 reasons that a seller would want a buyer's agent, working with a buyer to not only get the transaction done, but make sure they're covering all those pitfalls, right?
Right. They need to get
Buyer's
them
not
to
a
the
cake.
closing table.
They're not a piece of cake, are they?
No. Yeah, a lot of last minute, I don't want to do this. And or cold feet. You see it every day. I'm sure, Billy, you see it a lot.
Yeah, I've already seen a few listings in our MLS where the commission's lower, a lot lower, and then it says now you can work your commission into it. And my best guess from reading between all the lines is that they're trying to price essentially lower. That's a pricing strategy, not a commission strategy.
Correct.
And so once again, like we were saying a little bit earlier, is I think that we need to do a better job of sitting at the table and not just explaining marketing in the sense of this needs to be pretty. Marketing falls into every category. The price helps market what we're offering to it. And I mean, I challenge listing agents to go or sellers and go and talk to their local builders. Their local builders need agents. They not only offer double the amount of compensation to a buyer's agent, then they're going to throw in some appliances, a design center credit, and probably a bonus on top of that.
Right.
So if a builder would do it and encourage a buyer's agent, to a brand new home that apparently has nothing wrong with it, why wouldn't a seller just simply offer cooperative compensation?
Yeah. And I want to remind everybody if you're a Realtor member, NAR Code of Ethics 1616, that if you're going to negotiate that commission that is offered out there, you have to do that before you submit an offer over because you can't do that after you've submitted an offer. It's got to be done ahead of time
Mhm.
because everything is negotiable, right?
Everything is
Every-
negotiable.
But are you? That's what I would like to ask a lot of agents is they say that everything's negotiable, but are you? Because I think a lot of agents sit down at the table and they say this, my broker charges 6% for me to take a listing.
Being a
And
broker, that's offensive when agents say
there's
that.
They shouldn't. They
No.
should say, let's talk about the strategy. Let's have a menu of pricing, a menu of option. But I feel like it almost feels like agents are hiding behind like that it's going to win the deal to blame this person who's not at the table. And yeah, everything's negotiable. Are you? And second part of that is the statement, my broker charges 6% to take a listing without any explanation. That's throw that script away.
Yeah, if you're gonna use it around me, definitely say I'm gonna demand 10%, not just
I start at 8% with all clients. My hiring is 8%.
right?
Practice. So your business practice is your business practice.
Right.
Comfortable or not. That this is my business practice. This is what I do. Here's my value. This is the process. This is the grind. This is what happens. This is what I do. This is my
I'm
business. Stay away from
exactly.
Stay away from it.
And I'm willing to compensate the other agent 3% of my commission too. And then I go through the list of everything they do. And we do give our sellers the option of we go through what happens if an unrepresented party shows up, what happens whenever, if it's a lawyer or someone's mom from Houston who wants to rep them in Dallas. You get to choose, and we're going to advertise this accordingly.
Right.
And we go through that with our clients. And now it's also interesting because I think if you took a bunch of agents and actually surveyed them and said, all right, how many unrepresented buyers actually closed the deal? How many title friends came through and closed the deal? And how many people brought Aunt Betty to the table to close the deal? It's probably 1 out of 20 or 30 deals for each of us, if even.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
this year, out of almost 200 deals, we've closed one unrepresented buyer, and the seller actually called me and said, "Will you supervise the transaction for $1,500? You don't have to do anything else. You just need to write it and represent the buyer." And I said, "I will write the contract. I will not do anything else. I will not negotiate." And we signed a buyer rep agreement that included all of the proper language, and he knew the only thing I was doing was writing the contract.
so you have a discussion with your clients about compensation.
Yep.
Don't think that's something that many agents have a good handle on to have with their clients, even though that's also in the code of ethics. So you're doing what the code is laid out there telling you to do. And even the amount of compensation that is going to be paid by a client, right? Why would someone have such a hard time discussing compensation with their client?
Social taboo. Nobody talks about what they get paid. You don't go to a doctor and say, "Hey, what are you going to make in my surgery? How much do you make each year?" It just is. I think socially, we don't talk about people's pay, but as agents, we have to talk about compensation. Last time you bought a car, did you ask the car person, "Hey, what are you making off of this car?" It's just not socially, it's not the way a lot of people are built. And we train them differently when they come in to be an agent. They're uncomfortable with it. And instead of saying, "This is my business model, this is what I do, this is how I make money," they don't want to talk about it.
I think I started having higher level conversations. One, once I had more reps under my belt and saw different types of deals. Because when you sit down with a buyer, you really don't know if they're buying new construction, because that's a whole different commission
Yep.
structure. In Austin, I'm going to speak for Austin. We have a bunch of wholesalers, and I probably closed 10 to 15 wholesale deals last year alone, which require you to work the very first line on half of it is no commission, right? So there's that structure, and then you go in and you hit the little industry disruptors like Ideal Agent, Home Light, and these other companies that come in with referrals,
Institution.
and then you start seeing different compensation. So if you're closing one deal every 3 or 4 months, you're probably only seeing 3%. It's really pretty. It's in the MLS. You're not having to go at the table and have these conversations. You start closing 10 to 15 deals a month and you start seeing the true spectrum of real estate, you're going to go in and learn how to do it. I was just telling Robbie before we got started, one of the agents on my team, I believe it was her first 3 deals during COVID. Every single one was like 2% or less commission, and so the only thing she knew was how to negotiate her commission.
with her buyer.
She actually had to go to the lender because you go and you don't realize this. And then all of a sudden you're telling the lender, no, they need an extra 8, 10. Cause I would say her average price point at the time was higher sixes.
Yeah.
So we're talking a large amount of cash that the buyer needed. So now she's having these other conversations. I remember looking across the office and being like, what in the hell are you talking about? And she's like, well, I'm making 3%. My buyer knows. If you can open your eyes as an agent in general and realize there are a lot of ways to do this, don't go and throw the industry disruptors out the window. That's just a way to do business. Negotiate how much money you want to make.
And agents have to understand that they're obligated if they've got a buyer's rep and they're going to hold their client to pay, let's say, the 3%, and they go to a listing that they are interested in and it only pays 1%, they have to have that conversation with that buyer up front so that when they decide to write a contract on that and they close, there's not a surprise that they're going to be owed money, right? And
Mhm.
having that conversation, if it's a taboo up front of not being able to talk about the commission, how are you ever going to? Unless you just decide, oh, I'll take the 1%. And that's fine too. I'm not knocking that. I'm just saying if you're going to expect the full, you have to pony up and have a conversation. I didn't want to say man up. I thought that would be a little sexy.
Well, and
But
on some transactions, let's be honest, your client gets the home of their dreams, the transaction of their dreams. You make in Austin going off an average price point, let's say $5 to $6,000. What's wrong with that? And you've just created a raving fan for life.
right.
I mean, that's a lot of money in general for a lot of people when we are in an industry where we don't have it. No one comes in and says, Diller, you have to stop at $50,000, $60,000. So sometimes I think we need to rearrange and reframe. If you get out there and have more conversations and close more deals, eventually there's not like a pressure on this 3% number
Yeah,
because you're not closing one a quarter
it's
or
true.
one a year.
Where do you see buyer's agency going? What do you see with buyer's agency? If you had a crystal ball, where would you see it go?
I'm
I
going
don't
to
think it's
defend it.
it's going because there is a value to it. And I think there's too much of a value to it for it to go away.
Right,
And I do believe that in the lawsuit that went through and the subsequent lawsuits that have been filed, it's a money grab, plain and simple. People understand the contract when they sign it. This is the money I make. It's right there in every employment agreement. And a few bad agents does not make a bad industry or a bad move.
correct. I agree with that.
I heard it explained the other day. They compared it to the what was it, McDonald's coffee, because one person spilled their coffee, then every single McDonald's like in the world had to change the marketing and the logo and the way they sell and advertise coffee because one
Content is
person out
hot.
of millions and
It's
millions,
coffee
billions of
hot.
people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how this is. And you know what? I can sell a house. I know I can do that. Now I just need to practice on increasing my conversations and framework around selling the buyer's agent.
And
Yeah,
all the buyer's agents need to do the same.
agreed. Buyer's
So
agents need to do the same. It's imperative to be able to, in 30 seconds or less, to be able to hit at least 5 hot points if you're a buyer's agent. What is the value that you deliver?
mhm,
And even having
Mhm.
those value statements, it's hard because you have to sit down, you have to do the work. But most of the people know why they do their job and what all they do. It's
absolutely.
conveying it and conveying it in a way that someone cares.
If you show up because you're just starving and hungry and haven't been doing your job and building your pipeline, that client's going to feel that energy from you regardless. You're going to feel desperate. We all feel desperation when it comes across, especially when you're dealing with a salesman or salesperson, especially when you're in an industry that people already see us as slimy salespeople. So if you show up and you have that commission or that I just need to close this deal, I just need this lead, it doesn't really matter what you say at that point, that energy is going to transfer. So if you show up as a professional and this is your system, this is your process, let me talk to you about the value that I put up and bringing to the table. We will be fine.
We will. And I think that slimy professional description is prevalent out there. And it really makes me sad because most of the people that I know in real estate work their asses off. They make sure that they get tons of education. They know how to represent their client. And then you come out here and you throw a show, like Diller said in the beginning, on HGTV, and everybody thinks, oh, I can do it. We have tons of influx of new agents, and they don't realize how much work it is.
Right.
Kind of the one thing that when I interview agents for the office and bring them on is the core of why they want to get into real estate. And the danger sign for me is always, oh, my neighbor told me I'd be good at it. There's always some, oh, I just thought I love the homes. That's like my favorite number one warning. How about I want to help people? And the people that honestly want to help people are the people that make the best agents
Right.
because they treat their clients like they have a brain. They give them the information, they allow them to make their choices, and then they assist them and they advocate for them in the best way possible. Those are great agents.
And we're surrounded by them every day.
Absolutely.
We learn who those agents are and who the agents are who get into real estate to have more time. Because
Mhm.
the,
To
you
have
know,
more time or money is their number one reason.
yeah,
And I think as a whole in the industry, we could do a lot better job of being transparent and being transparent with our clients, being transparent with, I think some people are scared to like really sit down with our, I don't know how long your representation docs are. I feel like ours in Texas are big all stack. And then you add broker required docs to that. However, slow down and be transparent. And that sort of falls into disclosure as well. For some reason, I feel like there's this, we've been taught, or there's this energy that we have to hide so much. And why? I heard of a team in Dallas who's doing an awesome situation right now where they're starting out with, let's just say 3%, but they're now offering buyer's agents bonus. If you bring us a deal in the first 7 days, we're actually going to pay this. If you bring us a deal, whatever, day 8 to 14, there's another bonus for this. And all, but the way that they sell it, and I heard the presentation to the seller is beautiful. And they just know how to do it. And they're being transparent across the board. And I think we could do a better job in practice on, like I said, front loading the representation docs in our meet and greets with our clients, being more transparent about how we make money and being flexible.
And I think that's the key is literally bringing up the agency, the representation, all of that up front
Mm.
and quit using DocuSign to complete a listing presentation. You know, I tell my agents, if your listing presentation is not at least 3 hours, you're doing it wrong. The buyers, yes, we run out and we show houses, but that should be followed by, let's go back to my office and have a discussion on how this works if you've not had that already.
right.
Even that, you should discourage running out or showing a house right away. Number one, for safety reasons. You should be meeting the buyer in the office and you should be going over your agency and how everything works. People can find homes on the internet all day long. That is not our value as agents.
No.
That is not our value. It is opened up to them. Our value is the process. Again, back to advocating. Give people credit for having a brain and have that discussion with them.
I'm giggling because I just saw the text come through. I actually have an agent right now who's very upset that never showed our listing, is not a member of our MLS, and is very upset about her compensation. And it's just like our listing agreement says this is what we pay non-MLS brokers. And we tried to explain this to you. And that just brings up in my mind like the conversation and expectation, not only between us and our clients, but each other. Hey, Robbie, I'm writing a deal for you. I live in Houston, Texas. I'm not a member of the Austin Board of Realtors. I'm showing and we're bringing a ready, willing, and able buyer. Can we discuss my compensation? It's not advertised in the MLS. I'm not a member. Instead of sending over contracts and then just trying to force it through, have a conversation.
Well, you
about
can't.
it.
You can't. 1616 says you can't do anything. After you've submitted that offer, you're screwed. She's screwed.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So many agents in Arizona do the same thing. This is only an hour away. Tucson's only an hour and a half away. But that's not your MLS. There's 8 different MLSs in Arizona, or 8 or 9. And you go outside your area and a lot of them don't even think, oh, I'm not going to get compensated for driving that extra hour. And it's
Right.
what made you think you would?
allowing the conversation. Exactly. Just have it and us not be one of the very first things I learned when I started as an assistant, I remember probably day like 3 is there's no ego in this business or in this office. And yes, I've had a little bit of an ego at times just because sometimes, you're excited and you're doing things, but in general, I would say having my ego in check for the many transactions I've been involved in and agents I've had the opportunity to lead has really helped to just call, stay calm, and it's just a simple conversation.
I'm smiling as you're talking about your ego, Diller, because you work your freaking ass off. So you're
Yeah.
entitled to a little bit of ego because you work so hard. So it's okay.
Thank
And
you.
that's all I'm going to say on that. I'm not going to, everybody can judge and say somebody has an ego. But Kathy, if folks want to send you a referral or talk to you about real estate in the greater Scottsdale area, how best can they get a hold of you?
Probably the best way is my cell phone number, but simply Kathy.Laswick at RealtyOneGroup.com is my email.
Can we
And
get the high priestess at Realty
the
One?
high priestess email is hi.priestess at no,
You need that too.
my cell phone number, and you're welcome to use it. Text. I tell people I work half days now that I'm a broker. It's 7 to 7 because by 7 usually there's a glass of wine in hand, and I don't like to give advice after that.
That's when you start giving out more commission.
That's what
I love that.
language gets a little looser, but it's 602-791-8839.
Okay, and if y'all didn't get that, hold on just a second and we'll take care of you. Diller, if folks want
Yes.
to get in touch with you or send you a referral for Central Texas because you go far and wide, how best can they get in touch with you?
Same, my email, and it's Dillar, Dillar Schwartz, SCHWARTZ at KW.com. I don't think there's many other Dillars, so if you just Google it.
In case you missed either one of their contact information, it will be in the show notes below so that you will have their full contact information so you can send them a referral or call them about working with them. Hello.
There you
Either
go.
one, great.
Thank you,
Thank
Robbie.
you both. I appreciate you. It's a huge conversation and we could go on for hours. Thank you for tuning in. We're dropping new episodes every Sunday at noon Central Standard Time. We'd love your support for the Real Tea with Robbie English. By giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel, it would really help us out. Be sure and share it with your colleagues and friends. And until next time, we hope you have a profitable and productive week.